Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're diving right into a seriously dense and highly charged segment from Fox News covering a military campaign they've dubbed Operation Epic Fury. Our goal today isn't to take a political side, but rather to objectively deconstruct the specific narrative this broadcast builds. We're going to map out exactly how this segment connects military action, massive economic shifts, and deep domestic political divides. We're going to break the anatomy of this broadcast down into 5 key themes: a new aggressive posture, Iran's economic collapse, global oil effects, the domestic political clash, and finally, funding the Golden Fleet. Let's get right into it. Section 1. A new aggressive posture, focusing on the Strait of Hormuz blockade. So the segment kicks off by outlining a very aggressive new military strategy, and the host sets the tone literally right out of the gate. By citing 4-star General Jack Keene's claim that the mullahs only listen to bombs, the broadcast establishes an intense, totally uncompromising rhetorical style. There's absolutely no talk of measured diplomacy here. It's all about framing this as a time for absolute, overwhelming force. They describe this naval blockade in absolute terms. They actually label it 100% foolproof. With 42 vessels reportedly turned around already, the interception of ships, like the Blue Star 3, is framed as way more than just a tactical move. It's presented as a definitive end to international piracy and terrorism in the region. And this next quote really illustrates the specific framing we're looking at. The language isn't just assertive, it's colorful and it's aggressive. The host calls the blockade somewhat more effective than the bombing and describes adversaries as choking like a stuffed pig. The whole narrative here relies on projecting absolute dominance and highlighting the immediate, devastating pressure being applied by the U.S. Navy. Moving on to Section 2, Iran's reported economic collapse. This brings us to the first major ripple effect the segment claims: total economic destruction. To really emphasize the targeted nation's immense vulnerability, the broadcast humorously reduces their entire economic output to just a few things. They claim 90% of the economy is oil, and the remaining 10%, just rugs and pistachios. Now, obviously, that's a massive hyperbolic simplification, but it serves a very specific narrative purpose: to argue that cutting off the oil supply is a fatal, completely unrecoverable blow to the regime. To back up this narrative of complete collapse, viewers are hit with a rapid sequence of alarming statistics. They cite a staggering 70% inflation rate, painting a picture of a country that's starting to resemble Zimbabwe. The sheer scale of this blockade's success is described as staggering. The segment asserts that an estimated 60 million barrels of crude oil are stranded. To put that into perspective, that equates to $6 billion just unable to be sold, literally rotting on the docks while the country goes broke. So the crucial point the broadcast really wants viewers to take away is that the targeted country is completely out of time. They cite reports claiming the country is on the absolute brink of disaster, with only 12 to 22 days left before their oil storage is completely exhausted and the whole system just breaks down. To really hammer home this economic devastation, they deploy some pretty striking hyperbole, claiming a simple cup of hummus now costs over $1 million in local currency. But it goes beyond just the domestic crisis. They outline an Operation Economic Fury. Reportedly, foreign villas in the south of France are being seized, and shadow banking networks used to fund the military are being actively frozen. The message they're sending is crystal clear: there is nowhere left to hide the money. All right, let's hit Section 3, global oil and foreign leaders. Of course, this conflict doesn't exist in a vacuum, and the segment frames these international shifts as massive wins for the U.S. For instance, the UAE pulling out of OPEC is celebrated as a huge positive for lowering global gas prices. In this new era of what they call resource nationalism, the United States is pitched as the ultimate reliable energy producer. They literally call it the world's cheapest, safest gas station. Globalism is declared toast, and American energy independence is positioned as our supreme global advantage. They also paint a picture of this whirlwind, high-stakes diplomacy executed by the commander-in-chief. In just a single 24-hour period, the show claims the president is huddling with oil executives, talking to the King of England, and even fielding a call from Vladimir Putin. And what's absolutely fascinating here is the specific claim that Putin offered to help with nuclear enrichment in the Middle East in exchange for U.S. help ending the war in Ukraine. They draw this sharp contrast to present a hyper-proactive diplomatic stance compared to past administrations. Section 4, the domestic political clash. So, while projecting absolute dominance abroad, the segment highlights a fierce political friction happening right back home in Washington. They set up a stark, highly polarized us versus them contrast. On one side, the Democratic view is characterized as defeatist, questioning the president's mental stability and labeling the operation a quagmire. But then, on the exact opposite side, the military and the president's view is presented, claiming that morale is at an all-time high and that military recruitment actually just broke a 30-year record. The military, as presented in the segment, pushes back hard against these political criticisms. They argue it's completely unreasonable to call this a quagmire when the conflict is literally only 2 months old. Furthermore, they claim that in just those 2 months, U.S. forces have already eliminated 90% of enemy firepower and targets. The narrative being built here is of a hyper-efficient military being unfairly criticized by domestic political opponents.
And finally, Section 5, Funding the Golden Fleet.
This domestic clash leads directly into the ongoing debate over the Pentagon budget and funding the future military. The narrative dives incredibly enthusiastically into a newly proposed budget that heavily features what they call the Golden Fleet. Just consider the sci-fi level weaponry they detail for the new Trump-class battleship. We're talking laser turrets, railguns, hypersonic missiles, and advanced nuclear capabilities. This massive spending is portrayed not as a burden at all, but as a thrilling and absolutely necessary leap into next-generation defense. But, of course, all that futuristic tech comes with a massive price tag. And the segment zeroes right in on the partisan fight over the bill. They present Senator Chuck Schumer's argument that these billions should instead be spent domestically, on schools, hospitals, and veterans. But the host counters this with a fiercely partisan assertion, claiming that previous administrations simply sent billions overseas to bribe adversaries. So the ultimate conclusion they draw? Yes, war is expensive, but it is cheaper to disarm them than to bribe them. And that brings us to the end of this deconstruction. By pulling apart this single broadcast, we can see exactly how complex geopolitical events, from naval blockades and global oil prices to futuristic weaponry, are tightly woven into a highly specific, bombastic domestic political narrative. So the question I want to leave you with today is this. When millions of viewers digest major global military and economic events exclusively through the lens of such an intense, hyper-partisan us versus them framing, what are the long-term, real-world consequences for our political reality? Something to think about. Thanks for tuning into this explainer, and we'll see you next time.